Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus, a new podcast from FlightGlobal offering insight and analysis into the world of aviation. We'll be publishing episodes twice weekly. Join us every Friday for a review of the week's news, and again on Monday for a deep dive into one topic from the worlds of aerospace, defense, and airlines. I'm Greg Waldron, FlightGlobal's Defense Managing Editor. Today our topic is drone warfare, and joining me today is my colleague, European Defense Editor Craig Hoyle. Craig, great to chat with you today.
Hi, Greg. Looking forward to covering this one. It's a good topic.
Yeah, definitely. Before we hop into it, I'd just like to set the stage. The last 10 years has really kind of transformed how we think about drone warfare. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we've seen a conflict where cheap commercial drones, some of which are guided by operators with a first-person perspective, are a lethal presence on the battlefield. Both sides have become major users, and perhaps the most memorable event of the drone war was earlier this year when Ukraine used FPG drones to hit 41 Russian heavy bombers at 4 airfields across Russia, targeting Tu-95 and Tu-22 strategic bombers, and really giving us a dramatic demonstration of the potential of drones if they're used creatively. It's important to remember that both sides have turned to drones largely out of necessity. Neither has achieved air superiority, and both face shortfalls of traditional military assets. Nonetheless, drones are by no means unique to the war in Ukraine. In 2020, Azerbaijan gave us a taste of what was to come when it used drones to devastating effect against Armenian forces. Cheap Houthi drones were also a headache for U.S. forces in the Red Sea earlier this year. We've also seen drones reshape conflicts in Syria, where multiple actors have used them as both weapons and intelligence gatherers, and in Yemen, where Houthi forces have used Iranian-supplied drones to strike deep into Saudi Arabia, showing how even non-state actors can now project power hundreds of miles beyond their borders. The technology is evolving very rapidly, and this presents major questions for modern militaries in areas such as drone defense, but it also presents big opportunities, has big numbers of cheap armed drones can provide, and I'll apologize about the buzzword, what the industry's taken to calling affordable mass, or in other words, large numbers of low-cost smart weapons that create major dilemmas for adversaries. Russia created a dilemma for NATO last week with a drone incursion into Poland. Craig, can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, so in Europe, we've become attuned to seeing daily news reports about waves of Russian drones carrying out strikes against Ukrainian cities. But having multiple examples stray into Polish airspace on the 10th of September delivered a bit of a wake-up call for everybody. Polish government described the incident as an act of aggression that created a real threat to the security of its citizens, while NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said it demonstrates Russia's recklessness in the air along our eastern flank. Whether intentional or not, such events are increasing in frequency, he added, citing airspace violations by Russian drones as also having happened in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Romania. This is clearly a strategy by Moscow to test the resolve of individual nations, but also the Western military alliance as a whole. And I think if anybody doubts that, they should consider the more recent event, which saw 3 Russian Air Force MiG-31 interceptors somehow venture into Estonia's airspace and remain there for 12 minutes before being ushered away. So we've already seen NATO's air policing presence stepped up in Poland as a result of that 10th of September incident, and Denmark, France, Germany, and the UK have all deployed extra fighters to help guard the country. And notably, the alliance, in announcing that step, also said that it plans to accelerate the fielding of counter-drone systems. So it clearly thinks what happened in Poland is by no means a one-off, and it's going to happen again for sure.
And Craig, if I'm correct, the drones Russia sent across into Poland weren't exactly very expensive systems or exquisite technologies, were they?
No, these were, they tend to use quite a lot of systems. Some of them are based off Iranian technology, but they're low cost, they are mass produced, and they can use them to either carry explosives or carry jamming equipment or electronic warfare payloads to confuse people. And what was interesting in the Polish incident was supposedly these drones lost their navigation. So it was an accident. They all ended up in the same place. But also, I think none of them had live warheads on, which seemed a bit peculiar. It definitely wasn't accidental.
Yeah, certainly a very strange incident, but certainly a wake-up call. And also, if I'm correct, you were at DSEI in London. What was the outlook? Were the drones figure prominently at the show in London?
Yeah, so I was there. So this is towards the end of the first into the second week of September. And it's a big tri-service show. In fact, that doesn't really do it justice. It's land, naval, air, cyber, space, medical, all sorts of things. But as you walk around the halls there, yeah, drones were absolutely everywhere, along with counter-drone systems. It is a real area of the industry that is taking off on the back of what's happened in Ukraine. But, it was already a big sector prior to that. But what we've really seen is that the technology advances that we're seeing in Ukraine on both sides of the conflict have delivered a wake-up call. So going around the halls at DSEI, you could see a lot of companies doing work to come up with systems that they can develop fast, build cheaply, and put out in the volumes that you need to actually pose a threat. As an example of that, the UK Royal Air Force earlier this year surprised us when it unveiled a new stand-in jammer platform called Storm Shroud, and that's been declared ready for operational use. So it combined two bits of kit that already existed. So that was the Tech Ever AR3 uncrewed aerial vehicle and Leonardo UK's Bright Storm electronic warfare equipment. So what was interesting with Storm Shroud is it was conceived, tested and produced quickly, and its operators say it's ready to use out of the box when they need it. So the UK only plans to buy a couple of dozen examples initially. And that's important because if the system gets overtaken by technology, then it's not going to be stuck with kit that's no longer of any use. Also, when you went round at DSEI, one example which I'd seen at RIAT also is a white styrofoam air vehicle, which was on the RAF exhibit. And they'd done work with Kinetic on this. I'm guessing it's probably got a 12, 15-foot wingspan, maybe. It's demonstrating the sort of new world of drones that we've gone into. So I was told the machine that actually crafts the air vehicle shape can churn them out at a rate of one every 4 minutes. Clearly, you can't do that with the engine, or sensors, or payloads, or warheads, but it just shows the agility you need to actually have enough kit to show. So one theme that came up from DSEI a lot, which is when you talk to people at the companies, when you look at the supporting technologies, so that's autonomy, machine learning, being able to operate the systems when the normal navigation systems are jammed, that's all stemming from the ability for the military and industry to test this kit under war conditions in Ukraine. And that's driving a really quick pace of spiral development. Another lesson I think we see from Ukraine is the emergence of what they'd call one-way effectors. So at the show, MBDA unveiled its crossbow. That's believed to be pitched at a UK requirement called Break Stop. And what Break Stop wants to do is to rapidly acquire low-cost ground-launched strike weapons. These are things that will weigh less than a ton, including the warhead. And notably, the UK has already been here. So MBDA tested exactly that sort of system in 2008, which was called Fire Shadow. And that was basically a derivative of the Storm Shadow cruise missile. But at that time, it was deemed not suitable to be brought forward to actual operational use. I think at that time, it was looking at things like rules of engagement and proportionality if they were using it in Afghanistan. And the world has moved on since then. So just to sort of go on with DSEI, you also see much smaller companies are in this space now. So I talked to chief executive of a company called MGI Engineering, and they had a full-scale model up of their Tiger Shark missile, which I think is also pitched for Break Stop. And what's interesting with MGI is their pedigree is in Formula One engineering. So that's a company that only in the last few years has looked to defence and thought, this is somewhere we want to go. but its chief executive, Mike Gascoigne, is very committed to just doing more in this area. We also saw some of the big boys tying up. So we had the BAE Systems Falcon Work unit and Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. They announced they're collaborating on electronic attack weapons, and that draws initially on a system Lockheed's used called the Common Multi-Mission Truck, or COMET, I think they call it. Yeah, drones were everywhere at the show, and generally in the UK, it's a big growth area. After DSEI, we had an announcement from TechEver that they're going to open a very large production site in Swindon next year. And I think they are maybe the 5th or 6th company that are going to be setting up there. Long way of saying the world's really changed. And the war in Ukraine just shows us that you can't think the way that you used to. So, if your bases can be attacked by FPV drones coming out false roofs in trucks, how on earth do you defend against something like that? So it's really made everybody sit up and look. And just as a sort of final aside from DSEI, when I was chatting to somebody from one of the companies, they wanted to talk about unmanned surface vessels. And I said, well, it's not something that FlightGlobal will report about because it's a boat, basically. And he said, but what if you use it to get close enough to an enemy ship without being detected to then launch 20 attack drones off it? So, something like that really makes you sit up and think about just the whole concept of operations is changing very fast.
Wow, Craig, that's actually really quite fascinating. That's a surface vessel that can launch drones. And there's other concepts like this that are out there as well. Like last year at the Zhuhai Air Show, China showed off a big UAV, like the size of an F-16 called the Tank Air. And the idea would be that this thing would fly to a target area and act as a mothership, releasing a ton of smaller drones onto the target. But, more about the UK. Historically, UK's had some challenges with unmanned aircraft and, drone development, like with, specifically the Watchkeeper program. How is the feeling that they'll be able to, really take the right course in what's a very uncertain and challenging market?
Yeah, we have got a bit of a checkered history. As I sort of alluded to with the MBDA Fire Shadow, this is a technology area we looked at quite a few years ago and sort of stepped back from, thinking, I'm not sure this is sort of legitimate in warfare to use this sort of equipment. And we've kind of been overtaken, really. So what happened with Watchkeeper is it's a relatively young system in operational use with the British Army. But at the end of last year, the new government in the UK included it in a list of equipment that's going to be retired early because it doesn't match the battlefield threat anymore. They feel it's not survivable. I know it needed a lot of work doing on ground stations and training systems. So there's an activity called Corvus at the moment, which is looking to replace Watchkeeper. And it actually feels a bit of a retrograde step. So what they're looking at doing is they will retire the Watchkeeper system and then they will field what they'd call a couple of task lines. So that might be ground station with supporting equipment and maybe 4-6 air vehicles that they can send off somewhere in the world to do a job. And that's something they did with the Hermes 450 before they fielded Watchkeeper. So it feels a bit of a compromise what they're going to do, but it comes back to this thing of they don't want to commit to spend billions of pounds developing something that will come into service in a decade's time and has already been left behind by technology. So it's, I think UK is trying to do things differently, but the procurement model here is still sort of evolving. So it may not be agile enough just yet.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Craig. It'll be interesting to see how the UK grapples with this. That reminds me, though, there was another show in Asia last week in Taiwan, a big defense show that they hold every 2 years. And there was some really interesting drone developments there as well. Now, of course, China has not given up using force to possibly take Taiwan, which it claims is its own country. And that's created a real critical defense need in Taiwan, especially given China's massive, military buildup, not least in the area of drones. But at this event last week, it's called the TADTE, which stands for the Taipei Aerospace and Defense Technology Exhibition. a number of the U.S. companies were present. I mean, even Airbus was present, talking about surveillance drones, and it was a very vibrant show for unmanned systems. One of the more interesting ones that came out was a thing called the Mighty Hornet 4, which is based on the Kratos MQ-178 target drone. And the plan is for Kratos and AIDC to create this thing. Basically, it'll be kind of a low-cost attack drone that can go out, it can perform ISR, it has like an AI pilot, and it can coordinate and conduct attacks. And they showed it pairing with this is called the Mighty Hornet 4, but there's also the Mighty Hornet 1, the Mighty Hornet 2, the Mighty Hornet 3. And all of these things are fairly low-cost systems with warheads. And they showed a really interesting graphic of the Mighty Hornet, the various Mighty Hornets teaming together to attack a carrier strike group. It didn't specify the country of this carrier strike group, but since the aircraft carrier had a ramp, it was pretty clear that they were pointing at China. You've also seen other work, with I think Taiwan is using the Switchblade 600, which is an AeroVironment product. Again, a fairly low-cost system that can be sent out to perform ISR and strike missions. You have the U.S. Replicator project, which is kind of secretive. We haven't heard much about it, but the idea is to create all of these unmanned systems, whether they be in the air or, in the water, I guess, that would be able to help thwart a Chinese invasion or Chinese military action in that area. And then there's also, a number of other drone programs across the region. China, of course, being the big drone heavyweight in the region. I mean, at the Zhuhai Air Show, you'll see a massive number of drones. And if anybody can produce, whether it's surveillance drones or one-way attack drones at mass and at fairly good quality, it's going to be China. I might add, though, that the countries in the Asia Pacific, Taiwan, China, Korea, Japan, Singapore, they're still very much investing into, highly capable aircraft systems, airborne early warning and control aircraft, fighters, and so forth. So while you have that very important emergent drone piece that is coming up, traditional air power still seems to hold sway. Is that also the case in Europe, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we don't come across as complete drone evangelists in this podcast. So the future for piloted aviation is definitely still strong. So in Europe, we've got long-term investments going into all three of the current operational types. So that's the Dassault Aviation Rafale, Eurofighter Typhoon, and Saab Gripen. Then you've got Turkish Aerospace, which is rapidly advancing its Khan fighter and getting international interest potentially. Then back in your part of the world, obviously, we've got Korea Aerospace Industries, which looks to be making good progress with its KF-21. Then we can't forget Lockheed Martin's F-35, of course, which will progress further as its TR-3 updates get full clearance and then as the Block 4 upgrades happen. And then beyond that, we've got the sixth generation efforts. So that's GCAP and FCAS. I would say in Europe, I was told off for saying GCAP is a European program because it has Japan in it as well as Italy and the UK. And then we've got Boeing's F-47. And as we record this, we heard overnight from the AFA show in the States that Boeing's on track to fly its first example in 2028. So that's coming soon. All of the types that are in use now and that are in development, they're going to have to be able to operate with this dizzying future mix of collaborative combat aircraft or loyal wingmen, whatever you call them, plus supporting air-launched effectors, long-range weapons, decoys, jammers, and all underpinned by sort of all-seeing data clouds. So the technology is going to be enhancing on the jets so that they can operate alongside these other types of aircraft. Slightly off-piste for this one, but just ahead of the Paris Air Show, I wrote up about an AI demonstration that Saab had done with its Gripen E, working with Helsing from Germany. And they were flying the aircraft in a beyond visual range air-to-air engagement scenario. And summing up how the AI agent performed during that early work, one of Saab's test pilots said, "Right now, there are still pilots out there who will have a chance, but that will change fast." And I think tying into the whole sort of unmanned systems, autonomy, CCAs, it just shows just being best of the best, it just isn't going to be good enough in the future.
Yeah, certainly. It does create a dilemma for, the man in the cockpit, if you will. I was in Australia recently for the, first public MQ-28 flight. And one of the things the Royal Australian Air Force leadership was talking about is the ethics around actually using these systems. I mean, on paper, it all sounds great. Like, you have a pilot that's sitting up there in the cockpit commanding a team of these collaborative combat aircraft, which are, almost as big as the fighter. But then these things, I would assume, would be dropping these, close-in effectors as well, which will also have a degree of autonomy too. So, how you actually really delegate where the pilot or the human fits in with this, whether he's in the loop, on the loop, because it would seem that there'd be a vast number of, decisions potentially being made in this environment. And I'd add too that to get to one of the points you made earlier about the UK electronic warfare effector, I mean, this is all going to be taking place in a very, very electromagnetically active situation. I mean, there's going to be a lot of jamming. It's going to be very challenging. Things will be dropping in and out. I mean, it's going to be immeasurably complicated. I mean, I'd imagine if you're, a fighter pilot up in an F-22 at 45, 50,000 feet, the airspace will be pretty clean. But if it's a pretty intense combat situation and you're a helicopter pilot with a bunch of the guys in the back, it's going to be a very crowded airspace, I'd imagine.
Yes, I alluded to the sort of combat cloud thing earlier, and that's only as strong as, the weakest part of the system. So I can definitely see a future where there are air-launched effects being fired off in all sorts of directions and causing some tension for people. I mean, I can remember back when a lot of the UAV stuff in Afghanistan was starting, and you'd have a Black Hawk flying along, and suddenly a UAV would fly 30 feet past the nose, and everyone would go, "Oh gosh, that's a bit worrying." So yeah, I think the deconfliction thing is going to be really difficult to manage, and a lot of it is going to stem to AI and machine learning, probably, which, yeah, I think from an ethical standpoint is challenging. Of course, the whole drone topic has very strong detractors who just don't like the entire thing on an ethics ground. So yeah, it's a complex area, but I think what we've all seen now with things like Ukraine is that if you take the sort of ethical high ground, what is the other guy going to do? So it needs a sort of an international consensus on how we're going to use equipment like this in the future. And then will the likes of China, Russia pay any attention to that?
Yeah, certainly. Russia and China will probably take a very different approach. It's kind of related, but in China, with the eVTOL space, they've gone a separate path. They feel that having a manned pilot in an eVTOL is going to be a hindrance to the adoption of that technology and to the success of that business model. So they've really focused on having all of these eVTOLs being fully automatic with this really tight central control, and that way, theoretically at least, you eliminate any chance of human error. But there was an incident, I think, last week at an air show in China where two flying taxis there was nobody aboard them, but they were doing a demonstration at an air show in China under full automatic control, and they collided and seemed to have crashed. And this is just two aircraft in a fairly static piece of airspace. So that kind of shows the challenges that we're going to be getting into in the coming years with this.
Absolutely. And I think eVTOLs, gosh, that's probably another podcast all on its own.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to do one on that at some point. But Craig, before we sign off, you've been a reporter with FlightGlobal for quite a long time. Are you still a manned aviation fan, or are you transitioning to become more of a drone fan these days?
Yeah, I've been doing this quite a long time. So back in the UK, I can remember back to when the Park Aberporth test centre was set up, and that was it's a UAV testing environment on the west coast of Wales, where you go about a mile over land and then you're out over the sea. So you could do all this great testing. And that was really heralded as UAVs are the future and they're going to change all our lives. And nothing really happened for a few years. So, I wouldn't want to go flying something unmanned at this point, I'd have to say. But it's a technology area that is not going to go away. And the systems are incredibly capable now. When we look at new things like Protector coming into service in the UK, that's going to be a real step change from Reaper that came before it. and you can actually fly in commercial airspace. It is the way of the future, I think, but I think for an awful long time, certainly long after I'm gone, I think we will still have pilots up there having some sort of element of oversight on what the machines are doing.
Yeah, certainly. I think pilots will still be around for a very long time to come. But I also agree with you that I think drones are very much here to stay. Well, thanks a lot, Craig. Great chatting with you today, buddy.
Thanks, Greg. That's been good fun.
If you want to learn more about recent air-powered developments, we'll have links to all our reporting in the show notes. Join us again on Friday for a roundup of the week's aviation news with some other members of the FlightGlobal team. And again next Monday for another deep dive. FlightGlobal Focus is a production of FlightGlobal with audio production by Lucy Johnson. If you have comments about today's episode or want to become a sponsor of the podcast, please email podcast@flightglobal.com. Find future episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. I'm Greg Waldron. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for FlightGlobal Focus.